Meeting's called back to order at 8:31.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Pia.
I make a motion to return from executive session.
Please do, Mr. Pia.
Thank you, sir. I just did. All right. Mr. Chair, I move that...
You actually should have a second and vote on
I'll
the
second.
executive session.
Okay, we're just returning back from executive session. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 9-0. Mr. Pia, do you have something else for us?
I do, Mr. Chair. I move that the town attorney be directed to proceed as discussed in executive session and that the mayor be authorized to execute the purchase contract for 952 East Broadway.
There's a motion on the floor from Mr. Pia. Is there a second?
A second.
Second by Mr. Can. Is there any discussion? Yes, Mr.
I'm going to say now I'll abstain from voting.
Mr. O'Brien's going to abstain for voting. Is there any other discussion? If not, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 8-0. Am I adding right? Because Mr. Poisson's not here. Okay. Now, Mr. Pia, do you have a second motion?
I do, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I move to suspend the rules to add to the agenda a license for the use of property owned by the town with SLM Services Incorporated.
There's a motion on the floor to suspend the rules and add a... Is there a second? Mr. Ticky, a second. Is there any discussion about suspending the rules and add it to the agenda? If not, I'll call this a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Chair votes yes. Motion passes 9-0. Mr. Pia, the second motion?
Yes, excuse me, Mr. Chair. It's right here. Mr. Chair, I motion to approve the license for use of property owned by the town of Stratford. May I ask the town attorney question, Mr. Chair? Mr. Leclerc?
We already voted on waive the rules.
Attorney Jackson, regarding the reading of the entire document. Okay. Mr. Chair, so the motion, to correct my motion, the motion would be to approve the motion to add the license.
You have to talk, yeah.
Here it goes. No, it's not. It would be a motion to approve, a motion to authorize the mayor to enter into a license for use of property owned by the town of Stratford with SLM Services, Inc., a copy of which license has been provided to all members and is part of the record.
As Attorney Leclerc stated.
Is there a second?
A second.
Second from Mr. Perillo. Is there any discussion? Mr. Can, you look energetic and eager to discuss.
Thank you, Chairman Connor. On this license, as it was presented to us here today, it reminded me of the Good Earth property. That's the Good Earth lease, where they paid low rent and they somewhat abused the privilege, and it's going to be it's been a hardship on the town. So this user is likely not going to abuse the privileges, but would there be other protections you could offer for the town to assure that we remain whole at the termination of the lease?
Good evening. This is Bruce Jackson, Assistant Town Attorney. Well, in this case, it's materially different. First thing, we have a license, not a lease. So we're basically not giving them an exclusive right. So the town retains the right to move around the property. We've asked them to fence it off. We've asked them to, in there contractually, they're going to put it back into the same condition. It's a piece of property that is not actively used by the town and doesn't have any other real use. We can put whatever limitations on. What specifically are you concerned about?
So we have a lease that the tenant has refused to leave, so to speak, or found it impossible to leave, and they may leave behind a lot of trash, if you will. So it would be learning from that experience, so that while this is a license, and their use of the property is going to likely be much different than what Good Earth did, Did we learn from the Good Earth experience and incorporate any protections into this agreement?
There are a number of protections having to do with the removal of the trees, insurance. We actually asked them to fence the space so that people can't get hurt going in between the trees. If I may, what the idea is, they're going to bring in mulch. Is that what you're bringing mulch in? If I may. And so you're bringing mulch, they're going to put the trees in. This is a revolving thing. This is not in there, they're doing anything. They're just storing it for a DOT contract. So there's really not people wandering around or any activities other than a location to place the trees. They'll be placed in a way not to interfere with the bikeways or the walkways of the greenway. And again, the fence is really to keep people out from getting hurt. Not that you're going to get hurt walking through the trees, but we didn't want to have any worries about that. There are substantial differences between the Good Earth property, in which we put in all the restraints because of the remediation that was going to be done. Here, they're just using it, and there's no other plan down the road for its use, at least in the near future. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? The mayor would like to address this.
Oh, sorry. I was waiting.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Kadimi, go
So
first.
the business that they do, the people who are leasing the property, what is their business again?
If I may, they've got a contract with the DOT to provide trees for the work that we can done on the Merritt Parkway? On the Merritt Parkway. Mr. Proto's working with them. So they basically, they have trees brought in that will then being used for the Merritt Parkway. So they come in loads every couple of weeks. They're there just sitting until the person using this property can't put the trees out until the contractors do their work. So we're basically just a holding space on a piece of property that's not otherwise used right now. It's short term. It's only supposed to be for 2 years. It might be less. They have an ability to extend a little bit if they need it, but the idea would be to do something for a local business to help them.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, you have the floor.
Thank you, Council. So do we know approximately how much space is going to be used on the parcel?
Yes, Mr. McCarthy from Public Works was supposed to provide us the drawing. We don't have that at that point, but we can make any agreement from the town council subject to the receipt of the drawing from him as to the space that would be available to the to be used and not interfere with town work.
I think that's a good suggestion. Thank you, Counselor. I also noticed that the water is included in the $3,500 a year fee. How many trees are going to be on the property? How often are they going to be watered? I mean, this is $3,500 for a license agreement and water utility? That doesn't seem like it's a lot of money.
The issue with water was only the ability to separately meter it. That was Mr. McCarthy's issue, was he had no way to, by the time we put an expense in to put a meter in to measure the water, but the also hope was during the summer it was going to rain and it was going to water themselves. If you wish to put in something, we'd have to guesstimate how much water. We could do that as well. I mean, I just have no idea how much water trees on a field would take on a given time. We just didn't want the town to have any expense for remetering to be able to measure the water.
Well, why would it be a town expense and not the licensee's expense?
We could make it the licensee's expense.
And that's what I would suggest that we do, because we have no idea how many trees, the amount of space, or the amount of acreage that we have. If you've ever noticed trees with the bags on it that have to be watered every other day or every day, how many gallons they contain. I mean, there's a way to ascertain how much water you're going to use. So
Then I would say to the
I
council,
think there's a few things that we should finish negotiating.
we could take care of that.
You're welcome. In light of all those things, should we entertain a motion to table this and get it corrected?
Yes, sir. I motion that we table it.
Or the second option is to let the mayor's office, approve it and let the mayor's office correct the questions?
I would like to make a motion, if I can, to accept the mayor's recommendation on the changes and the decision we made from there.
Okay, so with all, let's go back to this, is everyone okay with voting on it tonight with approving with the items needed to be approved, corrected by the mayor's office?
Just to give me an overview of I see the address, but what is it next to? Where is it at? I'm just trying to get a picture in my head.
It's right by the WPCA and the animal control.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, if there's no further discussion, then we're going to take a vote. All in favor of approving the motion tonight and letting the mayor's office work out the details, say aye.
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 Chair votes yes. Motion passes 9-0. 5.1.1, Mr. Pia, do you have a motion to strike?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to strike item 5.1.1 as referenced in the agenda.
Okay, all in favor of the motion striking, say aye.
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 Opposed, motion passes 9-0. We're on to 5.2.1.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to approve item 5.2.1, an ordinance appropriating $13,660,700 for various public improvements and equipment in the capital improvement program for the fiscal year 2018-2019.
Is there a second? Second by Mr. Perillo. I need to ask, Counselor? This one, we vote to approve the ordinance, and then we vote for the changes, correct?
No.
He's going to... Okay. Is there any motion to amend?
Yes, Mr. Chair, if I may. Mr. Chair, I make a motion to amend. First item, remove the Worcester tennis courts and add the repair to next year's CIP, a decrease of $255,000, adding the replacement of the Franklin School lower level floors to this year's CIP, an increase of $170,000, adding the design and engineering study for a splash park to this year's CIP, and an increase of $50,000, adding for various technological equipment replacements and upgrades, an increase of $35,000.
Is there a second?
Second, Dave Harden.
Second by Mr. Harden. Is there any discussion about the amendment? There's no discussion? If not,
Yes,
I'll...
it is a discussion.
Okay.
When you guys voted the other night, I wasn't there. I have basketball on Wednesday nights. And there's some paperwork we went through in terms of some of the projects that are being done that can probably perhaps be delayed. So because I wasn't able to speak to that point, that I have a difference, of my overview of what we're doing with the CIP. So, but thank you. I just wanted to share.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kadim. Is there any other discussion on the amendments? If not, I'll call it to vote. All in favor of the amendments, vote aye.
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 Motion passes 9-0. Two opposed or one? Just one. Okay. Motion passes 8-1. No, we have 9. 9. Yeah, we have 9. Mr. Cannon and I are going to go back to Garden School and learn, which doesn't exist no more, out of count. So I can't poke fun at him because I've been all night. Okay, so motion passes 8-1. Is not a whole item, right? Okay. Yeah. Now, Mr. Pia, do you have a main motion?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to approve item 5.2.2, an ordinance authorizing the issuance of $13,660,000 bonds.
No. What you're going to do is you're going to move that item 5.2.1 as amended be approved, please.
Should I restart my motion, Mr. Blair?
Yeah, your motion will just be that item 5.2.1, the ordinance appropriating $13,660,700 for various public improvements and equipment in the capital improvement program for fiscal year 18-19, as amended, be and hereby is approved.
Yes.
Is there a second?
Motion by Mr. Pia, thanks to the town attorney, the words, and seconded by Mr. Harden. Is there any discussion? No discussion? If not, we're going to call the vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Mr. Kadim, you oppose. Okay, so motion passes 8-1. We're going to 5.2.2, correct?
Yes, Mr. Chair, if I
Yes,
may.
5.2.2. Mr. Pia, is there a...
Yep. Motion to approve item 5.2.2, an ordinance authorizing the issuance of $13,660,700 in bonds of the town to meet the appropriation for various public improvements and equipment in the CIP program for fiscal year 2018 and 19, and pending issuance thereof, the making of temporary borrowings for such purpose.
Is there a second? Second from Mr. Harden?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Harden. Is there any discussion on this?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to amend the ordinance as stated before per the amendment. Do I have to read it in again, Mr. Leclerc?
No, you should just have a motion to amend Exhibit A, which is referenced in 5.2.2.
Okay.
As follows, specifically with those same amendments you just did to the other item.
Okay. So you need me to read in the 4 amendments again?
I would, please.
Okay. So a motion to amend item 5.2.2, as stated previously, the removal of the Worcester tennis courts and adding the repair to next year's CIP, a decrease of $255,000, adding the replacement of the Franklin School lower level floors to this year's CIP, an increase of $170,000, adding the design and engineering study for a splash park to this year's CIP of an increase of $50,000, adding for various technological equipment replacements and upgrades an increase of $35,000.
There's a motion on the floor. Is there a second? Second from Mr. Harden. Is there any discussion? Any discussion? If not, we'll call it to a, I'm going to call it to a roll call vote. Mr. Leclerc, roll call?
Yes, please.
Okay. Starting with Mrs. Jancho.
You're voting on the amendment first.
Voting on the amendment first, correct.
I vote aye.
Aye. Aye.
Motion passes with the chair voting aye, 8-1. Now, Mr. Pia,
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to approve item 5.2.2 as amended.
is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Dancho. Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, we'll do roll call. Mr. Pia?
Aye.
Mr. Tiki?
Aye.
Mr. Kadim? Mr. Harden? Mr. Ken? Mr. Perillo?
Aye. Aye.
Mrs. Dancho?
Aye.
And the chair votes yes. So motion passes 8-1. Okay, now is there a 5.3.1 on the library board? Is there a motion from anyone?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that Janice Capi be hereby appointed a member of the library board to the vacated seat of Kim Kadim, expiring 10/31/2018.
Second.
Second by Mr.
Harden.
Harden. Is there any discussion? If not, call the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 9-0. You're abstaining? Okay, motion passes 8-0. Number 6, is there a motion? 6.1.
I'd like to make a motion to send it to the ordinance committee.
There's a motion on the floor from Mr. Perillo, seconded by Mr. Harden. Is there any discussion before we send this to ordinance?
I think the motion should actually be to dispense with the first reading and refer it to ordinance committee, please.
Okay, there's, the attorney says very clearly dispense from the first reading and send it to ordinance. Is there a second? Okay, Mr. Harden. Okay, Mr. Can, I know you just cannot wait to jump on this thing here. Go ahead. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to request that the author of this revised ordinance provide a redlined copy of it so that when we get to the ordinance committee, we could see what revisions were made to the current ordinance. That's it.
We will do that. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion on this? Any other comments? If not, we'll call to vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes, opposed, motion passes 8-1. 6.2, resolution regarding preventive service initiative grant.
Yes, I make a motion
There's a motion from Mr. O'Brien on 6.2. Is there a second? Mr. Hardin. Is there any discussion? Andrea, can you come up here and, thank you. Defend the grant.
Yeah, so I'm not that tall. Maybe I could just, there we go. Okay, Andrea Boycevain, Director of Health for the town of Stratford. This is a potentially game-changing grant. It will provide us the opportunity to look at the business model for providing in-home asthma self-management services. We will explore forging a formal relationship with healthcare providers to be reimbursed for services that are now solely grant-funded. Healthcare is changing, as we all are aware, and we feel that local health departments can be a part of the transformation and add real value because we are in the community and of the community. And so we hope to be seen as, through this grant, working to be an extension of the continuum of care in keeping people well, and I dare say with the ideal of preventing disease in the first place. So.
Are there any questions for Andrea before we vote? Thank you, Andrea.
Thanks.
Okay, all in favor of the motion, vote aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 9-0. Now we're into 6.3. Is there a motion?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to approve the resolution approving and authorizing the submission of the annual action plan, program year 44 for the community development grant funding, as duly noted on the additional pages.
There's a motion on the floor. Mr. Can, is there a second?
Second.
Second from Mr. Can. Is there any discussion? If not, we'll call to a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 9-0 with the chair voting positive. On 6.4, is there a resolution from Mr. Ticky? I think you were going to waited to say that.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion that the transfer of $7,000 from council committee account to the Arts Commission account being hereby approved.
So moved. Second.
Second by Mr. Hardin, motion by Mr. Ticky. Is there any discussion on this?
Just a reminder, what is the 7,000 for again?
The way I understand it, the last council held monies in contingency for the Arts Commission and had to come in requesting it. And where we did in the past, they would get an allocation of, say, $20,000 all at once. The previous council, because this is still working on this year's, they need the money to get, they get withdrawals they needed. So if you remember right, about 3 months ago, they requested $5,000. We gave it to them. Okay?
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, let's call to a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion, chair votes yes. Motion passes 9-0. 7.1, appointment of independent auditor. Is there a motion? Mrs. Dancho.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion for the appointment of an independent auditor.
Second by
I'll second
Mr. Pia.
I'll second.
Is there any discussion? Any discussion? If not, we'll call to a vote. All in favor of appointment of independent auditor, vote aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 9-0. We're going to Arts Commission. We're going to go down to 7.2.2 Housing Authority. Mr. Pia, do you have a motion?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion for item 7.2.2, the Housing Authority, that Daniel Cook be hereby appointed a member of the Housing Authority to the vacant tenant of the authority seat expiring June 30th, 2018.
Okay, there's a motion for Mr. Cook to be appointed. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mrs. Dancho. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, can we pass this for a minute and have some discussion?
Yeah, we spent a lot of time discussing. I don't think. I'll tell you what, I'll entertain a motion to table this.
Second. I'd like
Okay.
to entertain a motion to table it.
Is there an entertaining motion, Mrs. Dancho? Okay. We'll put this on a table for the next meeting, okay? All in favor?
Aye.
Chair votes yes, motion passes 9-0. Now, Mr. Pia, 7.2.5.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion for item 7.2.5, that Dave Schrader be hereby appointed a member of the Waterfront and Harbor Management Commission to a vacant seat expiring May 31st, 2019.
Mr. Pia has a motion. Is there a second? Mr. Tiki, any discussion? If not, we'll call this to a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Chair votes yes, motion passes 9-0. Can I entertain a motion for adjournment? Motion to adjourn. Is there a second for Mr. Tiki? All in favor? Aye. Yeah.